Hello, friends. Welcome back. Happy Monday, May 6th. This week, I have golf matches on Monday, the 6th, and Wednesday, the 8th. So there won't be any Zooms those mornings. Some people have reached out with questions regarding some of the material. Fantastic. Um, if we can't get those questions answered by email, then we can. I'd be more than willing to set up a time to Zoom and kind of talk through your questions with you. Um, this week, I would be available to kind of have Zooms in the afternoon after fifth hour. So anytime after 1:30 would work. Thursday or Friday, again, as I do not have any golf before the end of the school day those days. So again, if you have a question, we can't get it done. Well, one, if you have a question, shoot me an email. Two, if we can't get it answered by email, then let's figure out a time for us to meet. This week, we continue on talking about our culture and how that impacts our behavior. You were supposed to watch the documentary on Three Identical Strangers and answer those questions, and that's where we're going to pick up today before you start on questions 7 through 16 on the Chapter 3 reading guide, looking at our cultural norms, the rules of society that we follow. The documentary, hopefully you already submitted your reading guide. I do need to come back to this one here. The documentary talks about three triplets, boys, separated at birth, grow up more or less within a relatively close proximity of one another. And the documentary then kind of walks through the studies that were done of them, which, I mean, they were pretty inhumane studies that were done, but that's beside the point. The studies showed how similar these boys were. And yet, at the end of the documentary, you find out that the boys were not very similar. So we got to look at a couple of things here. And one, we got to talk about culture. All right. Because we're trying to figure out what dictates our behavior. Is it our nature? Is it what we're born with? Is it as a documentary showed, the similar traits and behaviors that the boys had? Did that come from their genetics, what they received from their parents, or was it from their nurture, the environment that they grew up in? Our culture, what it is meant to do, all right, is minimize or control our reflexes or drives. I pointed in the documentary, all three boys, when they were talking about when the boys got upset, I think what they would bang their head on the crib. They would get upset, they'd grab the rails of the crib and start smashing their head against it. Is that nature or is that nurture? Considering the fact that three boys were born, they spent a short amount of time in an orphanage, and then were adopted. If you took child psychology, or if you've taken psychology, we know that children who do not have enough time, do not have enough contact with their mother, are going to exhibit some behaviors. That would very much point out nature. But since the boys have a hot temper, they get so frustrated that they bang their heads against the rails of their crib. That would be nurture. They have a similar short fuse, a similar hot temper. What the documentary doesn't point out, very clearly enough, especially when they're kind of walking through how they're so similar, nature versus nurture. We have to be reminded they all grew up within this close proximity with one another. It wasn't like one grew up in New York City and the other one grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the third one grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. There would be a preponderance of evidence that the fact that these guys grew up relatively close to one another, their environments were somewhat similar. Obviously, they looked the same, similar hair, similar faces, similar hands, relatively similar voices. We're talking nature. But at the end of the documentary, you're informed that one of the boys commits suicide. Can't handle the struggle. And they go on to say, in the environments in which they were raised, right, the boy that committed suicide, the brother that committed suicide, grew up in a very strict environment, grew up in a very draconian environment in which there are harsh rules and discipline. This would point out that nurture has an impact on our behavior. Again, if you've taken the psychology classes, you've read the studies, whether an AP Psych, Child Psych, or just regular Psych, if a child is born from two parents that both have schizophrenia, it's not a foregone conclusion. It is not already decided that the child, him or herself, will have schizophrenia. Their nature, undoubtedly, they're at an increased chance, an increased likelihood of having it, of having schizophrenia. But their nurture, the environment that they grow up in, does have an impact. I think the last question of the video guide was talking about what has a bigger impact on our behavior. Is it our nature and our nurture? And I haven't looked at what you guys said yet, but undoubtedly it's both. What we're born with will have an impact on our behavior, and where we grow up will have an impact on our behavior. The question is, though, how much? And it's not going to be the same. There's not going to be a scientific, concrete, mathematical equation that we can, plug information in and get a specific result. It's all going to depend because, again, at our essence, at our core, we're animals. We are all not going to be the same. You could probably estimate that our behavior is 50-50. 50% nature, 50% environment. Or it could even swing up to 60-40, nature versus nurture, or as the documentary says, nature and nurture. We're all born with a predisposed, predetermined set of genetics. There is no question that our genetics influence our behavior. Our genetics influence our reflexes and our drives. But our culture, our nurture, that whole point of culture, the nurture that we grow up in, is meant to minimize those reflexes. So depending on the success of the nurture, success of the environment, those reflexes, those drives, those genetics can be controlled or minimized. So answering the question, what does control our behavior, nature or nurture? Clearly both. And it's going to be somewhere between 50-50 straight up, going halvesies, or that pendulum could swing 60-40, either nature or nurture being the 60, and the other one, the one remaining, being the 40. All right, we got to talk about the rules that we follow now in society, the norms. Some of our norms are just customs. Some of our norms are based on morality. Some of our norms are going to be based on laws. We're going to look at those norms, why we have them, what the purpose is, how they affect us. And that's where we'll pick up the conversation on Wednesday before we start our norms experiment. So for Wednesday, you have questions 7 through 16 on the Chapter 3 reading guide. Hope you're all are doing well, and I'll see you guys later this week. Go Spartans.